Hello, everyone. My name is Justin McDowell. That's me there. I'm actually wearing that shirt and those pants right now. Kind of a coincidence, but it is one of my favorite shirts. You can follow me at RevoltPuppy. You can tweet at me as well. And yeah, so I am the web designer at the Evergreen State College. However, I did not go to school there. I instead went to the University of Nebraska at Kearney. And there, like at most schools, most of the upper level classes were qualified by prerequisites, especially the fun classes like graphic design and figure drawing. Had to take other classes in order to be able to take those classes. And the one class that I was dreading the most was Color Theory 101, and the reason why was because I got wind of an exercise from someone who had taken the class before me, and it looked a lot like this. So what I had to do with this was to take a color, squirt a bunch of it onto a palette, and then paint a square of that color onto a piece of paper. Then I had to take a tube of white paint and add a single drop into the red, and then paint another square. Then repeat those motions. Each time a single drop of white was added, and a bit of red was removed. A bit of white in, a bit of red out. White goes in, red comes out. White in, red out, repeat until the square is completely white. This was the kind of groundwork that I had to do before I could take an actual graphic design class. It was not a thrilling exercise, but 10 years later, I feel almost grateful to have had that level of control over color, because speaking as a web designer, the intervening years have not been that easy on me. First, we had keywords and hexadecimal codes. Hex codes are a confusing jumble of letters and numbers, and so forget those. Keywords were pretty intuitive. It's the name of the color, you just write it, you know what it is. Problem is, these were the 16 colors you could choose from. With hex codes, we got quite a number of more colors that we could use in our palettes, but you could say that it lacks a little bit of subtlety. We could only use this 216 color web-safe palette. But eventually, at long last, we were graced with 24-bit color. But we were still stuck with those cryptic hexadecimal codes. So does anybody know what color this is? Someone want to shout out a guess?
Red.
Red?
Red.
It's actually purple. It's just really hard to tell what the color is unless you're familiar with that RGB to hexadecimal relationship, and if you know how those colors mix together. I mean, you guys didn't even know that I was lying to you. This color is actually green.
I was going to say the green seems high.
Some of you know, but usually when you glance at that, you're just like, I don't even know. Just put the color in front of me and I'll know. So yeah, it's just really hard to tell unless you're actually looking at the color.
Or as I was saying before, using the atom editor.
Or use the atom editor. But thankfully, color has continued to mature over the years. We've got gradients, drop shadows were kind of a cool thing. Opacity is all right. Alpha channel support is really good right now. So finally, it is a good time for color on the web these days. The good news is CSS keeps getting better, and there are some new things that we can look forward to. So what's something that we can look forward to? One answer is blending modes. So blending modes are one of those things that have been in Photoshop for a few years now, well, for a long time now, many years now, but they're finally gaining traction on the web. So technically, color blending applies mathematical operations to the color components of image pixels on overlapping layers. So what that means to you is that you can quickly create some rad effects. So let's spend a little bit of time on this. Blending modes can be broken up into a few different groups. Darken modes are so named because they tend to create darker pixels. Lighten modes, as you can probably surmise. Oh, let's go through those real quick. Darken modes, multiply, darken, and color burn. Lighten modes will tend to lighten pixels. Those are screen, lighten, and color dodge. Contrast modes will both lighten and darken and increase the contrast of an image, depending on the color values of the overlapping layers. And then there are composite modes, which affect images based on each particular color component. So colors are made up of hue, saturation, and luminosity. So these composite modes will kind of attack those singular channels of a color. And there's a fourth one called color, and that one uses hue and saturation as the source, so it kind of combines the two of them. And so what these composite modes are good for is creating that old-timey wanted poster look. So finally, we have the comparative modes. They're a little bit weird. You probably won't use them that often, but they're often used to compare and align two images. I don't think I've ever used exclusion in my entire life. And therefore, these are what I would call the essentials: multiply, screen, overlay, color, and luminosity. And I'm going to share with you, I'm going to go in depth a little bit on a couple that I think are particularly useful, which are multiply and screen. So we're going to be using this painting by Claude Monet as our main image. I'm going to blend this texture on top of it. And you'll see how the shades get applied to the base image. So let's take a look at the multiply blend mode. This mode is called multiply because you're literally multiplying the color components on the top layer with the layer below it. So this is how the function looks. X equals the resulting color. A is the top layer and B is the bottom layer, so X equals A times B. So yeah, all this creative stuff, it's just math underneath. Surprise! So again, more practically, what you need to know is that the darker the pixel is on top, the more likely it is to show through at its full value. So you can see the black pixel on top, this stuff is completely opaque, it's totally black, and then this was white on that overlapping texture, and now you can see the image coming through at its full strength, and then everything else darkens to some degree, because multiply is one of those darken modes. So why does this go? So here's a practical example. Say your boss wants you to add his signature onto an image like this. Claude Monet hands you a painting and he says, put my signature on it. He gives you a scan of his signature, and you just slap it on top of your image. Not quite the effect that we're looking for, all that white is showing through. So we'll take it into Photoshop, select all that white and delete it. So now we've got this nice transparent image. Slap it back on the image, and we end up, when you zoom in, we've got these halos coming around the image, and it kind of makes it look a little bit more pixely and unattractive. This is where the multiply blend mode comes in handy, because when you blend with multiply, all that white fades naturally into the background, and then you have a nice smooth edge on your letters now. So then it ends up looking like the signature was inked right on top of the image. There's none of that white background showing through at all. And we didn't have to take it into Photoshop and do a lot of fancy graphics editing either. So I use this for things like signatures, but you can also do it with logos. If you get like a scan of a logo and you don't have access to the SVG, then you can kind of throw that up there and do the best you can with it. So multiply is pretty cool that way. But what if we wanted the lighter pixels to shine through instead? This doesn't have any white pixels at all. That's where the screen blending mode comes in handy. But you may be wondering, if multiply darkens an image, why doesn't divide lighten the image? Well, if you look at the color math, you can see we're not doing any division at all here. We're actually taking the inverse of A times the inverse of B. So if you hate this kind of formula math stuff already, just know that every other blending mode is only going to get more complicated from here. But the good news is, most of the time you don't really need to know that. I've lived my whole life and not really needed to know the mathematical nuances of these blending modes. But I'm showing you because some of you might be more development-minded than I am. You might be able to do something cool with this, and I think it's cool to take a peek behind the curtain once in a while. So in this case, screen lightens the image. So remember, this was black before. Now you can see the image coming through at its full value. And this was completely transparent, and now it's completely opaque as the color white. And then everything in the screen blending mode lightens to some degree or another. So I'll show you another quick example of what you can do with this. This time, I want it to somehow look like I've spray painted Monet's painting onto a wall with this stencil. I just have to set the blending mode on the stencil of the screen, and the computer takes care of all the rest. Et voila! So as you can see, blending modes can help you easily add effects to your image. There are a couple good ways to figure out which blending mode you want and what you can do with these things. One is to do a little bit of research, figure out the formulas if that helps, but also figure out just in your head, like in multiply, black is opaque and white is transparent. So just figuring out what exactly is happening with those pixels. And the other thing is to just like go full force and just say, does multiply work? Does screen work? No. Does difference work? No. Just like go through and hammer through. Honestly, I use both tactics. Like sometimes it's just easier to just hammer through them. So how do you use these? Blending modes can be applied in two different ways in CSS. Background blend mode property blends between multiple background images of an element, because that's something you can have multiple background images now. That's pretty cool. Now you can blend between them, but it doesn't blend with whatever is underneath that final background layer. And then the mix blend mode property will blend between the actual HTML elements with whatever is below it. So a couple different ways you can blend things. One snag with mixed blend mode is that it applies to an element and all of its children as a fully composited element. So to show you what that means, I created this drawing here in Photoshop. Our goal is to reproduce this with just CSS. We want to put a text box on top of our background image. We want to put text inside of it, but we want the background image to kind of shine through the lighter areas of that text box. So we can get this far in CSS before we need to do anything with blending. So far, so good. Pretty easy to do. To blend this text box with the background image, we want to choose the screen blending mode, because remember that will let the image show through some of the lighter pixels, but not too much. So in code, that would look something like this. We've got our text box, and we want to just set the blending mode to screen, and easy enough. Everything's done. Ugh, not quite. Comes out looking like this. We've got, our nice blended background, but now the text is completely transparent. It's completely invisible. Remember, this is what we wanted it to look like, not invisible. And so that's the thing about mixed blend mode, is that it takes this whole thing as a fully composited element. So we've got the text box with the white background and the text that's set in black, and we're applying the screen blend mode to it. And therefore, the text becomes invisible. What I want for it to do is to apply the blending mode just to the text box and then set the text on top of it with a normal blending mode. But unfortunately, I haven't discovered a way to isolate those child nodes. I hate to disappoint you. I have been playing around with it. You can see some of my work, and you can try playing around with it at this CodePen URL. So I've been playing around with the isolation property, is what I've been meaning to say. That's a companion property that also has come out with the mixed blend mode and background blend mode. And you'd think that isolation would allow you to isolate the children, but instead it isolates the blended element from the background behind it. And I honestly have no idea why you would do that instead of just turning the blend mode off altogether. So I've done a lot of research. I've looked at examples, and to me it just seems easier to just turn blend mode off if you're going to use isolation in this way. And there's not a way to isolate the children, which is like what you would really want to do. It's sort of like when opacity came out, and it was like you can make things semi-transparent, and then it makes all your text semi-transparent along with everything else. It's just like, no, what are you thinking? Anyway, go to this URL, play around. If you can figure it out, tell me, because I would love to know myself. All right, so let's talk about browser support. Blending modes are supported in most major browsers, except Internet Explorer, and that does unfortunately include Edge. Yeah. Right now it's listed as under consideration at status.modern.ie. It is marked as a low roadmap priority, but you can help. If you go to this site, status.modern.ie, you can click through to their user voice forum, and you can vote for the features that you want to see them implement. You can put up to 3 votes in each feature. You will put up to 3 votes. So these are the properties that need our votes. Mixed blend mode, actually this number is out of date. It has 433 when I checked today, so it just gained 13 overnight, so that's great. I had to start the suggestion for background blend mode, and it had 4. However, again, overnight it's gone up to, I believe, 14, so it gained 10 votes. So that's pretty cool. But still pretty low numbers compared to everything else on there. So go there, status.modern.ie, and vote for adding these supports. So,
what about Opera?
Opera, I don't know. I don't support that myself at my job, so I would assume since they're with the Chrome, they're using the Chrome rendering engine, and they probably also support them. So, good on Opera. There's also other good news. Edge supports blending mode, these same blending modes for SVG, so hopefully they can just like port some code over or something like that. And they actually upgraded these. They put these both on the backlog from, we are ignoring this, now it's on the backlog. And that happened just last week, so there's some hope there, and I'm really excited about that.
And in 20 years, we'll actually be able to use that on IE.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing to watch out for, IE isn't the only thing, the only problem, is the performance of your web page. I noticed that some blending modes can degrade the smoothness of your scrolling. So if you're looking for that buttery 60 frames per second smoothness, they might not be quite ready for use. For some reason, this happened to me with the more high contrast blend modes like color dodge and color burn. I'm not sure why those apparently are using more memory or whatever, but the point is test in browsers, test on devices, that way you know how these things are going to work and they can be more predictable. It was fine with multiplying screen though, and those are some of the essential ones, so I'm not entirely worried about it. Opera's good, okay. Yeah. Live follow-up.
Yes.
Also, Safari is missing the 4 composite blend modes. So remember, that's hue, saturation, color, and luminosity. So no old-timey wanted poster effects for you in Safari. So clearly, we still have a ways to go with blending modes, but nevertheless, I hope you can see that color on the web continues to march forward, adding another tool to our design belt. This is really great, but CSS alone is still pretty inflexible with color. And this is where the Sass comes in. But it doesn't, for example, allow for modifying and mixing color values on the web, just like I did back in Color Theory 101. In other words, if you were to anthropomorphize CSS, in this case in the form of a lovable little squirrel, it still wouldn't have the prerequisites to take graphic design. Come on, CSS. But the web is marching ever forward, and we have some new tools in CSS and beyond that can take our colors to the next level. So as you've seen, CSS has changed very slowly over the years, and in general, I think this is a good thing. It's good for standards to evolve slowly. But every so often, evolution needs to make a giant leap forward. We used to only get this kind of giant leap when we would deprecate old versions of IE. Today, though, it's supposed to go faster. There we go. Memory. Today, though, all you need is a little bit of Sass. Sass gives us a number of new tools that help us blaze trails at a quicker clip. So let me show you what I mean. Let's make a simple 3-color palette. The first thing I'm going to do is give them names. So remember at the start of The Joy of Painting when Bob Ross would tell us which colors we were going to be using today? Real quick, I've come to this shocking conclusion that so many people don't actually know who Bob Ross is. So I won't shame you, but if you do know who he is, raise your hand. Oh, that's wonderful. Okay. I've given this talk before and people were like, you don't know who that is.
Little trees.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, he'd tell us which colors we were going to be using today at the start of this show. Colors like HSL 113, 100%, 70%, RGB 255, 161, and hexadecimal FFA 100. Of course not. He would call them by unique, memorable, identifying names. Titanium white, alizarin crimson, phthalo blue. Yeah, exactly. You buy your paint with names on them. So whether you're using hexadecimal, RGB, or HSL, it's never going to be as easy as remembering color names. And that's where Sass is great, because we can use actual human names for our colors. So we might be able to do something cool with this very vibrant color scheme, but chances are we're going to be using a few variations on these colors. Sometimes we might want a very light version of a color. Sometimes we might want a very dark version. As it turns out, we don't have to do any work because Sass can do this for us. To lighten the color, we can use the lighten function that's built right in. Pretty easy. And to darken a color, we can use the darken function. Simple as that. Now we have a pair of color tools to mix color on the fly. Go wild. Okay, don't go too wild. This can get a bit tricky. Consider this. Can anyone tell me how much we need to lighten Hulk to get to white? Any guesses?
Not as much as it.
So what's your guess? Give me a number.
20%.
20%. You're wrong. It's 30%. Come on. All right, so who knows how much we need to lighten berry to get to white?
That'd be 60%.
60 or 70? Split the difference. Not bad, not bad. And what about crunch? How much do we need crunch?
45.
45? That's pretty close. You guys got better as it went on. But there isn't a lot of consistency in these numbers. But there is a way to figure this out. I didn't give you quite enough information when I showed you these colors. But there is a clue in the HSL value of each color. The L stands for lightness, and the inverse of that is the maximum percent you can lighten a color before it becomes perfectly white. So in this color grid, you can see what I mean. This was 70% white, so so then we could only lighten it up to 30% more before it becomes white. This was 50%, so we could only lighten it 50% before it becomes perfectly white. And here are the darker colors. So at some point, each of these colors is going to become black, and it can't get any darker than that because it's already black. So in order to master this new color palette, you just need to memorize the lightness values of each of your colors. Which is kind of annoying, but hey, it's better than memorizing those damn hex codes, right? Okay. Listen to Bob Ross. Let's try something else. SAS has another color function called scale color that can move the color components proportionally. So it can do the RGB channels, the saturation luminosity channels, and the alpha channels, but it doesn't do the hue channels. They do have a function called adjust hue, but I'm not going to cover that today. So in this case, if we were to lighten Hulk by 50%, it would blow out to completely white. But if we were to scale the lightness by 50%, it would be halfway between where the color was and white. So now, how much do I need to scale Hulk's lightness to make it 100% white?
100%.
100%, exactly. So if I go to 99% white, then it's still going to be 1% Hulk. So knowing that, how much do I need to scale Barry? Knowing that Barry is much darker than Hulk. 100%, exactly. Now I know you've got this last one. What do you think? How much do I need to scale Crunch's lightness? 65, 70%. Exactly. No. So yeah, it's more proportional that way. And here you can see with this color table, more proportional, diverse, predictable color tables. And here's the darker colors. And this is great because you don't have to memorize lightness values. You just have to know the names of your colors and relatively how light or dark you want to make them. So let's see how we can put this together on a common UI element, the button. We want to give our button a sense of clickability, and we're not buying into that whole flat fad, so we know that clickability can be easily achieved with a simple gradient. Traditionally, this can be written in CSS like so. We pick a top highlight color and a bottom shadow color, and we include those in our gradient declarations. These two colors, though, are not in our SAS constants. We'd have to figure them out on our own. Maybe go into Photoshop, pick a lighter variation of our swatch. Not too big of a deal, but if we want to add a second button color, then once again we need to go back into Photoshop and figure out what those color values are. Well, so what? So we'll just add a couple extra constants to the list. Not too big of a deal. But wait! Each of these buttons has a hover state where the hover highlight and hover shadow are going to be a little bit lighter than the button highlight and shadow. So do we declare 4 more constants, or do we just fill these color values in once and hope we don't need to use them again later? By using scale color, you can keep your color palette limited to your base constants, but still have incredible intuitive flexibility with tints and shades. All right, so let's think back to this color exercise once more. My professor's point in making me go through this wasn't trying to show me how white makes red lighter. He was trying to show me how mixing one color with another color makes another color. If we want to do that in SAS, it turns out there's a function just for that, and it's called mix. Mix accepts 2 color values and a percentage. If we want to mix white into Hulk by 60%, we'd write mix white Hulk 60%. It's called tinting. We were talking about that earlier. Likewise, if we want to mix black into Crunch by 30%, there's Crunch, we write mix black Crunch 30%, and that's called shading, mixing a color with black. As it turns out, mixing with white and black does perceptually the same thing as scale lightness, but conveniently is shorter to type. But beyond that, mix has a huge potential to create a look and feel for your websites that were previously not possible before. If we can mix colors like paint now, can we make our websites look more like paintings? I think we can. We just have to think more like artists. Artists have been mixing colors for thousands of centuries now because it's a perfectly intuitive thing to do. If you have one pigment and want to make it another pigment, you add in other colors. To do it in the digital realm, you have to understand how that color math works, and as I've demonstrated, that's not very intuitive at all. So Bob Ross, why don't you show us the way? In this episode, The Joy of Painting, as he does in many, Mr. Ross wants to paint some snow-capped peaks. And snow is white, right? So that's just what he puts onto his palette. After that, he mixes in a little bit of red, because I guess this was the episode where he painted happy little corpses on his mountainside. But just wait, because next he goes into blue, because, I don't know, why not? And in the end, he creates this lavender color. If you're anything like me, you may have a hard time believing that that is the color of snow. But, in the context of the painting, it begins to make sense. And when he's all finished, he's painted the perfect sunset. We think that snow is white, technically it is, but what Bob Ross understands, and what all great classical painters understand, is that light has color, and that color affects the color of the objects that it reflects off of. Artists pay attention to the world around them, and perhaps nobody has paid more attention to light than Claude Monet. Over a century ago, Monet began painting the haystacks outside his window, but he didn't just paint one painting. He didn't even paint just one painting at a time. He would have his assistant cart out wheelbarrows of canvases and would work quickly and minimally on each one as the light changed throughout the morning. Sometimes he would only work on a painting for just a few minutes before the lighting conditions had changed enough to warrant moving on to the next canvas. When he was finished, Monet had painted 25 canvases of the same haystacks in different light, seasons, and through varied weather. The same haystacks, the same base colors, yet with myriad different ways to see them. It's a remarkable study of light and wonderful from a purely aesthetic standpoint, but from a design standpoint, there is some utility here. Because in the words of another French impressionist, Pierre Bonnard, color does not add a pleasant quality to design, it reinforces it. See, the color of light can tell a story. One of my favorite times of day is about an hour before sunset. That's what's known as the golden hour. During this time, the sun's light is redder and softer because it diffuses as it travels through more layers of atmosphere to reach our eyes, and it lends a feeling of optimism and peace. Even artificial lighting can do that. Here in Spike Jonze's Her, the reddish color mimics the lighting from a perfect sunset. Other colors can tell different stories. Here, in Only God Forgives, the color palette uses vibrant blues and reds. On a color wheel, blue clashes with red, and this makes the film feel harsh and lonely. Here in Wong Kar-wai's Fallen Angels, the green lighting in the background is unnatural, and it makes the shot feel impersonal and sinister. Since the 80s, cinematographers have used color grading to more closely match color across different shots. Remember, lighting conditions can change within minutes, as Monet had discovered. But O Brother, Where Art Thou was the first film to have its entire color palette sepia tinted by computers. And this time it wasn't just for consistency throughout the film, it was to give the entire film that sepia-tinted old-timey wanted poster feel to it. The Coen brothers used this coloring to help tell their story. Jean-Pierre Jeunet also used color grading in Amélie to help tell a story, and in this shot he contrasts Amélie's dress with green tinting in the environment that hints at her playful imagination. And by ramping up the color contrast between the foreground desert tones and the cooler background colors, George Miller creates a cartoonish sense of energy in Mad Max Fury Road. Nothing else about this production is subtle, so I don't expect the colors to be restrained either. In this panel, from the comic book Young Avengers, we can clearly get the gist of what's going on in this scene by the drawing alone, but the color of the light amplifies the scene in a dramatic way. This couple could have been anywhere, but when they're in that club, it gives the scene context, a heightened mood, and a sense of feeling. And that brings me to one of my favorite things, comic books. Where's my water? Oh, here it is. I also like water. Comic books. Just like color on the web, color in comics has come a long way from the crude process days to more diverse color palettes, to complex and subtle details with the aid of computers, to the highly artistic rendering and stylization of today. While there's no house coloring style, former Marvel Comics editor Von Alimagno began valuing colors who could paint what he called the perfect sunset palette, which are warmer palettes rooted in playing off reds and oranges and and lighter yellows and blues. This style, he says, gave Marvel's comics a much more inviting look and feel than the DC Comics line. What if we could easily influence our colors the same way a painter, photographer, or colorist does? With SAS, it's remarkably easy. So let's take our color palette and add in just a couple extra colors, a highlight and a shadow. Then we'll take SAS's mix function, but instead of simply mixing with black and white, let's mix with these new colors. Suddenly the whole palette becomes very warm and inviting. And the darker colors are rich and vibrant. If I'm feeling inspired by Monet and I want to see my design from a different perspective, I can simply change the values of these two constants, and the next time the SAS is compiled into CSS, the colors will automatically reflect the new changes. With this next scheme, I'm starting again with the same Hulkberry Crunch color palette, but this time the highlight is kind of a bright pink, and the shadow, it looks like black here, but it's actually a dark desaturated green. Maybe harder to see on the projector, but it totally changes the look of the color palette compared to that last one. Yet it still remains based around our original brand colors. Yeah, that just pretty much looks black. If we apply this to our buttons, they have more warmth and more vibrance. The only difference in this code is that one highlight color and one shadow color have been changed. This is, again, going to be a little bit less clear on the projector, but the difference between the original colors and the new ones are subtle. But that's the point. Your colors should work together to create an aesthetic that enhances your design. Let's get back to nerdy things. What can we learn from this painting? Well, notice how there are a couple light sources in this one. This was probably a fluorescent light shining down from above, giving everything kind of a bluish cast. And then down here is maybe an incandescent bulb that's kind of creating more orangey, yellowy skin tones. These two colors, orange and blue, complement each other, so it really ramps up the vibrancy of this piece. But maybe we want two different kinds of highlight and shadow colors to give the layers of our page more depth and really make them pop out against each other. I mean, really, you could have as many highlight and shadow colors as you felt were appropriate, but realistically, more than a handful probably aren't going to solve any new problems for you. And I'll show you an example of this a little bit later. But first, I want to cover browser support real quick, just in case this is unclear to anyone. All of these colors get compiled back into basic CSS color declarations, so that means every browser will be able to see these effects, and so you can start playing around with this today. If you include fallback colors for your gradients, browsers, as long as a browser supports color, they'll be able to take advantage of this kind of coloring. So here, let's check out the demo. I created a little demo site. You can go to demo.lighting, which is clearly the best use of this top-level domain. You can follow along on your device if you like, but don't worry, I'm going to show you up here on the projector too. So here it is. This is the demo site, Gulfoss Travel Supply Company. The concept behind this site is to revitalize well-designed luggage labels that show off where you've been throughout the world. So you can view the different stickers, order the ones that you want, slap them on your luggage or on your laptop, most likely is where these would end up. So that's what the page looks like. In this demo, I picked some brand colors and decided to have 3 highlight and shadow combinations for use throughout the page. Got the standard highlight and shadow, and then I felt like I needed some areas with a little bit more contrast, so I just did black and white for a bright highlight, deep shadow. And then in the far background, which is back here, I have background highlight and shadow. I just want those reserved for the background, just to give a little bit of separation between them. So basically your standard gray UI, something that you're pretty used to. So here it is again. Now let's click on this first sticker. Here for my current residence of Olympia, Washington. You can see that it's got lovely yellowy highlights and purple hues of Mount Rainier in the background. I want my page to draw from the colors of this sticker and give the whole thing a cohesive appearance. So instead of using these sterile UI colors, I'll choose a highlight and shadow color that convey a much more organic atmosphere. My brand colors, of course, remain the same. Here we have it. The mood of the page is totally different, yet all of the markup, typography, and basic layout remain the same. It's just that since nearly every color on the page has been mixed to some degree or another with yellowy highlights or purple shadows, a new light literally has been cast on the page. Now the background is an eggshell color. Content background is anyway. Add to cart button is natural yet vibrant, and the background purples mellow with the contrasting foreground, so the actual background. Pretty cool. So let's go back and look at another one. For Lincoln, Nebraska, my hometown, this sticker features many examples of the city's public art all stacked up on top of each other to mimic its distinctive Capitol building. Unlike Olympia's yellows and purples, this one's really, really red. And again, I want my stickers page to reflect that, so let's change these colors again to these colors. So now the highlights and shadows are red, with the exception of the background. I wanted to choose complementary colors because I'm going to have a lot of text. This is actually tinted slightly red. It's a little bit unclear on this projector here. But it's hard to read text on a red background, so I wanted to make it like just barely red. And by contrasting it with green, it kind of brings that red up a bit without sacrificing the readability of the text, which is a pretty cool effect. And here we have it. Same markup, same basic CSS, just different colors quickly and easily with that. For Austin, Texas, I had one of my friends, Marcus Tegmeyer, create a sticker from one of his favorite hotspots there, Barton Springs Pool. And when you visit the page, the cool waters and the green leaves are reflected throughout. And there's Marcus. Here are the colors that I used. Note that the official brand colors, once again, have not changed through this entire site. It's a remarkable difference from page to page. But it's been a little bit subtle right now, but you guys want to see something a little bit more dramatic? Good, because that's where the presentation is going next, whether you like it or not. So let's get out of the United States and into the grid. This one's for all you fans of Tron. Woo! Okay. Pretty dramatic. Not the most inviting color scheme, but maybe it works in its own 90s hackery way. Need a little bit of fixing up here in the nav just to make those readable, but like check out this footer. Yeah. Love the little footer. It's pretty cool. To get this crazy look, I decided I was going to swap the highlights and shadows around. So now the dark shadows became bright highlights, while the highlights turned into shadows. So I just wanted to show how versatile your color palettes can be, because all of these color changes were done by just swapping around 3 highlight and shadow combinations. It's pretty cool. So there you have it. If you want to refer back to this later, just go to demo.lighting. You'll find everything there, including some links to some blog entries I wrote about it. I've also gotten a list of part article in the works, which I'm really excited about. But yeah, one more thing that I want to look at before I let you go. We're going to switch back to plain old vanilla CSS for this next capability. As you've seen in this demo with highlight and shadow colors, we can take our inspiration from the sun, but soon we'll be able to use the actual sun to influence our palettes. And that's because many of our devices have light sensors in them. So typically this is used to determine how bright or dim your screen should be. When you take your device out into the bright outdoors, and then you take it back into a dark room, it'll automatically crank that brightness down so that it makes using the device more pleasant. Right now, that's only available at the hardware level, but with luminosity media queries, we'll have a standardized way to use those sensors in supported browsers. So you'd write a luminosity media query similarly to how you'd write a height or width-based media query. And there are 3 levels of luminance in the spec. Normal, which is normal, we're all used to that. Washed, for example, when you're out in direct sunlight, and dim when you're in dark rooms. So what can we do with these levels? Well, Tweetbot is an unofficial Twitter app that uses the device sensors to detect the ambient lighting in the room. So when it's bright, the app displays black text on a white background, but when lighting is dim, it automatically switches into a dark theme. Instapaper is a read it later app. It uses the time of day. It doesn't use the sensors, but this will give you some other ideas about what you can use. Uses the time of day to present its content in different ways. In the daytime, when the light is brighter, the app uses black text on a white background, and at night it switches into its own dark mode. However, during the golden hour just before sunset, it gradually tints the screen with a sepia tone, sort of like an old-timey wanted poster. The app's creator, Marco Arment, claims that it subtly increases reading comfort without being distracting or tacky. So we could try something similar in CSS with luminosity media queries. And one way we could do this is by changing the amount we mix our highlight and shadow colors by. So here we can see we've got highlight and shadow throughout here. In a washed environment, we increase the contrast to make it easier to see in the sun. And then down here in a dim environment, we'll back off just so we don't sear the corneas of our visitors when they come indoors. And alternatively, we could set 3 different highlight constants and 3 different shadow constants but keep the mix percentage the same. So here we have a highlight shadow, and then a bright highlight, and a deep shadow in a washed environment, and a dim highlight and a dull shadow in a dim environment. But it's always this 80-50 split throughout the media queries. I don't have any recommendations on which of these two ways is better, because I don't know which way is better yet, and that's because the bad news is, right now, no browsers or devices support these new media queries. But it is in the spec, so look for those in the future. So we now have tools to take color on the web to the next level. Blending modes bring some advanced design capabilities out of graphics editors and into our hands. SAS color mixing gives us the most intuitive way to mix color on the fly, which is going to make even Photoshop jealous. And with luminosity media queries, we'll be able to create dynamic lighting that Monet could never have dreamed. Thank you for being here and listening to me. You've been a great audience. I'm glad you laughed at my jokes. Once again, you can find me on Twitter at RevoltPuppy. If you want the slides, they are here. And of course, the demo is at demo.lighting. Thank you very much.
Do you have questions? I'll put you on the spot here. But anyone have questions? Besides, when can we do all this awesome stuff with color?
Some of it today.
Some of it today.
Some of it, I'm doing that evergreen.
Did you have suggestions for fallbacks for times that you can't? Like, if you had a image that you're using lighting or something like that to see through it, what kind of fallback? Do you have to do a different image for that, or just can't use it yet?
If you're doing some effects with blending modes, then I would say if you can fall back to, sometimes it works to fall back to like just a transparent, semi-transparent color instead of blending with that color. So sometimes it can still look good that way. That's if you're using a solid color for a background. If you're using an image, then I'm not quite sure if there's a good fallback at this point. Some of this stuff with blending modes, you might have to wait until like the support is good enough, or you're using it in situations where you don't have text overlaying it, and the blend mode is more of an enhancement than it is a requirement.
Cool. All right, everyone seems stunned.
So the way that I approach that problem, where you've got the background image and you have the thing that you want to be semi-transparent, and then the text that you want to be totally opaque.
Yes.
It's a common problem. The way that I usually handle that is with some absolute positioning, just put the text in its own div. Is there something you come up against that makes that just not a good option, where you're just
No, I
I
think
can't wait for this?
Yeah, I think that's a great option if you know what the dimensions of the image are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's really challenging to do something like that with like responsive design if your image is going to be flexing a lot. But if you generally have an idea that you know that this is going to be 320 pixels wide all the time or whatever, then I think that's a great solution.
Hey, when you showing your statistical pages, what colors were you picking?
What colors was I picking?
Yeah.
I picked stuff. I actually took the images, the sticker images, into Photoshop, and then used the eyedropper to find hues that I liked.
Oh, okay. So you're still deciding what colors that I use.
Correct. Yeah, I wouldn't in my demo site. It's like a new style sheet for each of those pages. So most of the time, I don't have like a programmatic way to automatically make each page a different color scheme. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend that in most cases anyway. Usually you want to pick your highlight and shadow colors and then just kind of use that as kind of your branding elements and just do it across the whole site consistently.
Good to go.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks
Thanks
again.
again, Justin.